birthday of Binyamin. So today's the yahrzeit of the person who lived longer than anybody else who lived. Misushala lived to 969 years old, and not, this is a week. Today is a week before the Mabul, and a week before the Mabul, Noach entered the Teva, and Misushala died.
There's actually a machlekes about that.
Yes, there is, because last week it also said that. So there must be a machlekes. There must be different shittas.
No, there's a medrash that says that Cain died in the Mabul.
Uh-huh. That Cain?
Cain.
Who?
Yes, Cain.
Cain. Okay.
Yeah.
So that means Cain would have lived longer than Methuselah.
That's right.
Now, you ever heard of the term penny pinching? We all know what penny pinching means, but there was another term that was called coin clipping. You ever heard of the term coin clipping?
Yes.
So
yes.
So this is also Yud Cheshvan. It's a day where 680 people were arrested and sent to the Tower of London, which is like a jail. And most of them, 293 of them ended up being killed and they were hanged because they were accused of coin clipping. Coin clipping was they would clip a little piece of the gold coin off and it would still be a coin, and now they would start accumulating gold. So it's like damaging the mint. Well, here's it, it's clipped. They're flesh and soul. Well, we're soon going to see it's negated in today's Gemara. Because today's Gemara, we're going to talk about if you cut a piece off a piece of bread, you have a loaf, you cut a piece off. First of all, can you use it for lechem mishnah? Is it a shalom or not? And how much has to be missing? So a little tiny bit could be, you can't tell, but it still has value. It's also, yeah. Okay, so it was also the I don't know how they know this, but it's also the yahrzeit of God. I'm not sure how they know all that. It was the yahrzeit of God. There was another well-known person, I think, whose yahrzeit it was. Yeah, the Chabina Rav. It's the Chabina Rav's yahrzeit as well. Okay, gewaltig. So let's see the Heilige Gemara. I believe we learned the Mishnah yesterday, but we should probably could actually give a run through it again to refresh our memories, which is at the bottom of Daf Pei Amud Beis. We're one blot ahead of the Dr. Heilige Gemara. Bakoil Myrovin. At first, we'll learn that Pashup Shot. You can use any type of food to make an Eruv Katseris with, or Shituvim Mavuyesh, Mishtatim, Chutz Min Hamayim, Umin HaMelech, except for water and salt. And there's different reasons why water and salt. Others learned that water and salt are somewhat associated with klola, water to the mabul, melach to Sodom, divrei Rebbe Lezer. B'shu Emer, kikar hu eruv. It has to be a complete kikar. Afilu mafe saw v'prusa. If you have a massive loaf but it's broken, ein ma'arvin ba, you wouldn't be able to use it for eruvei chatzeres and shituf mavuyos. But kikar ke'isr, if you have a tiny little bilka, who shalem, and it's complete, my Raven boy, you'd be able to use it for the Eruv, and the Gemara is going to explain. So Zok the Heilige Gemara, Daf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph. Tanina Chadazimna. Why did we need our Mishnah to tell us about what you're allowed to use for an Eruv? We already learned this once before. Bakoil my Raven, Umishtatim, Chutz Min Hamayim, Vamelach. Zok the Gemara, Amar Rabba, maybe the reason why the Mishnah repeats it here is Lafuke with Rabbi Yeshua, to make clear that the Tanakama does not hold like Rabbi Yeshua. The Omar Kikar in Midi Achrin Eloi. Rabbi Yeshua says that you're only allowed to use a Kikar, and you can't use other things. Kamash Malon Bakoil. So that's why our Tanya here is saying Bakoil Myrovin to very clearly dispute the Shita of Rabbi Yeshua that you might not have known just from the first Mishnah. I'm sorry? Yeah, but it didn't have Rabbi Yeshua Shita here. So by having a Rabbi Yeshua Shita here, it makes it very clear that the Tanakama is arguing with it.
Well, why wasn't it brought down there in the previous Mishnah? If there's a machlokes, it's usually stayed. This guy holds this guy holds that, and et cetera, et cetera. We
Very
need
good point. Let's see the Mashkan of the Gemara, and we'll see if it addresses it. Zok the Gemara Bakoil Kamashon Bakoil Eisvei Abayu Bakoil Ma'Eruvin Erev Chatzeres Bakoil Mishtatim Shetufim Avuros V'loy Amru La'arav V'Pas. The only reason why it's suggested to make an Erev Pas El B'Chatzim Avad, which we learned that the whole by Erev Chatzeres we learned you need Pas. For Shetufim Avuros we've been learning that you can use wine, you can use anything. So frek the Gemara. Let's analyze this price. Man shamet lei to Omar pas in midach. Who is the Tana who holds you can only use pas and not anything else? Rabbi Yeshua. It's Rabbi Yeshua. So that means this brisa that we're now quoting must be following the shita of Rabbi Yeshua, because it says you can only use pas. Vikatani bekoil, and it says bekoil. So what do you mean bekoil ma'Eruvin? And then it says you have to use pas. The teretz is up to Rashi. Shot and this brisa must be that bakol ma'Eruvin you're allowed to use any type of pas. That's what it must mean. So you have to say that what the Mishnah means. Yet what this brisa means, you have to say is it means any type of pas you could use. I'm sorry. Well, there are. Why would it have to say any different type of pas? Well, there are many different types of pas. There are different types of pas. You could have wheat, you could have barley, you could have oats. So I'm sorry, because we are going to soon learn later today. It's a good point you're bringing up, because we're going to learn later today that there are certain types of breads that actually are not eligible. So there's a need to say that it includes all the different types of breads. So just like when you touch this brisa, you're going to touch bakoil as meaning different types of breads and not any type of min. So how do you know from our Mishnah that it argues on Rabbi Yeshua? This brisa that uses bakoil is going according to Rabbi Yeshua, and bakoil doesn't indicate that it argues with Rabbi Yeshua. So by the same token, our Mishnah, which says bakoil, you wanted to say it's to teach you that any other min is good. You don't really see that from the word bakoil, because bakoil, you see, can be used to refer only to bread. The shita of Rabbi Yeshua that we're trying to highlight that the Tanakama disputes is not his shita that you have to use bread. It's his shita that it has to be a complete loaf, and that's not a liba d'chula alma. So, period. So our Mishnah, the reason why our Mishnah had to repeat this halacha of bakol ma'Eruvin wasn't to tell you that we argue in your Yeshua and you have to use other meaning. That we might know from a different Mishnah. What our Mishnah is trying to highlight is that our Tana holds that you can even use a broken piece of bread. It doesn't have to be a shalom. Okay, so now I want to go back to what David was asking before, because I'm not sure if that impacts what you were asking. What were you asking before? You're asking why does it? Well, you're muted.
Sorry. If we're holding on this particular subject that we learned earlier in Chaf Vav Amud Beis, as the note says, so why wasn't this opinion brought down then? If he has a different shita.
So based on the Maskana of the Gemara, so in the Havim of the Gemara, where we thought the discussion is what species is used, what type of food is used to make an Erev. So I hear it's a very good question. I understand the Gemara wants to stay
to the Havim.
Like you should say before. But now that we're talking about a whole different sugya, which wasn't even raised until now,
right.
But Prusa, so Kubi now it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, okay.
So Zakti Gemara, Prusa my time alone. The Maisa, what is Rabbi Yeshua's objection to using a challah that's not complete? Rabbi Yosy, Shol, Rabbi Mishum Eva. It's because of Eva. What does Eva mean? Eva means everyone's contributing to the Erev. Most people put in the bilka. They throw in the bilka. And then one guy throws in a slice of bread. So people are going to be like, with a chutzpah. Here I'm contributing a proper bilka. And this guy's contributing a slice of bread. It'll create bad feelings. Well, I guess the size is impossible to adjust, but the difference is a piece of bait you can find lying around. The milk is someone had to go out and acquire specially. Um, there are those who learn more. If we know that if we're all contributing to an Erev, I have to let anybody take my food and anybody else let me take their food. We're sharing the food. If I have a hakpada, then the whole Erev will be possible. So it's not only just to avoid Eva, it could also possibly have according to certain Rishonim. But based on this Svara of Eva, we have to understand a couple of things. A is we have to understand that if the Erev is done by everybody contributing, I understand why there'll be Eva. But what if one person sponsored the whole Erev and he was Mizaki to everybody, like we discussed as one of the common methods of doing Eruvin, which is what we actually do today? There it's not an issue. Because if you're not chipping in, if you're not paying, what do you care if there's big pieces or little pieces or full or not full? It's only if everyone is contributing, there'll be a problem of Eva if I'm giving a bigger, a complete bilka and someone else isn't. I'm sorry? It doesn't seem like they redo the Erev every week, only if it gets used up. Usually they make the Erev once and it lasts forever. The other shaila is again. So if I'm giving a bigger piece, if I give a shalom and he gives not a shalom, it'll create eva. So there are rishonim who learn. Is that what is Eruvin? Eruvin is bringing people together. You can't do something that'll make machlokes when you're trying to bring people together. The Chassam Sofer even says it's a mitzvah, and we learned earlier in the Gemara. Somebody asked, how you talking in such a neighborhood where two Talmid Chacham live and doesn't have an Erev? There's actually a mitzvah to make an Erev because it brings people together. You can't try to bring people together with a method that's going to actually pull people apart. Well, we learned yesterday that if it gets minimal, then it's going. There's one sheet in the Mishnah holds you don't have to, but there are those hold you have to. Yeah, so it is possible you have to rejuvenate. Right. That's right. They didn't have matzahs with preservatives in those days. Why? Oh, that's what you're saying. So you're saying there should be, even if one person is being zoich there for everybody, there should be Eva because he was zoich for everybody. I guess that's not the ikar way of making the air. The ikar way of making air really means everybody's contributing. That's really why everyone's joining forces. But I hear what you're saying. But and also nobody's forcing me to make an air for everybody. But someone is forcing me to contribute. So it could be there's a difference. But that's a good point. Good point. Amalei Rabacha heard the Rava the Rabashi. Rabacha, the son of Rava, asked Rabashi, "What happens if Irvu kulam beprusos mouth?" So this is along Chaim Tzvi's line of thinking. What if everybody put in a broken bilka? What's the halacha? Omer lei, and I love how it's expressed. Shema yachzer davar likol kulay. If everyone does good and put in a broken piece, in the there's no eva. The reason why we don't allow it is because we're afraid next week one guy might put in a bilka. And then the next guy's going to put in the bilka. And then it's going to switch around. And once everyone's putting in the bilka, then it'll create eva that one guy's not. Rabbi Yochanan, this reminds me of like keeping up with the Jones. And once it becomes a style, everyone puts in a fancy bilka, then the guy who doesn't is scoring. So therefore, everybody has to put in a complete bilka. Rabbi Yochanan, this is like just like when you make takanas for a kiddush. Instead of making takanas, you're only allowed to give like broken. They make it takanas that everybody has to give kiddush. Everybody has to give a complete bilka. Rabbi Yochanan ben Shol, nitla himenu kidei chalosa uchedei dimula. What if a very small amount was missing from the challah? And Rashi told us chalosa is ein chasorin shezeu tekuna. If you normally we separate challah mina isa when it's still in the dough form. But what if one baked it with the challah, didn't separate it? And the halacha is you separate it after it's baked. So what if someone separates from the bilka a small amount that's going to be for challah? So now it's not complete. Or kedei demua, Rashi says, im nidmas, meaning into this dough, shenafla truma b'chulin, some truma got mixed into the chulin. But also we're going to kikazu. Now the halacha is that if a little bit mixes in, even though it's bottled, even though there's enough chulin to be mevatel the truma, you still have to remove whatever portion it is that belongs to the kohen. So you took off a small bit to give it to the kohen. So you took off a very small bit. So what is halacha? Amar Bechlam and Shol. You could still use it. That's not called missing. That's still considered complete. Correct. The Gemara, the Brisa says otherwise. Latanya kedei dimua, my Ravin loiba, but kedei chalasa ein my Ravin loiba. If kedei chalasa is a little bit more. But loy kasha, it depends what level of challah you took off and how much you took off. Habachalas nachtoin, which is a very small amount, and therefore it will not be considered chaser if it's missing. Habachalas balabayis, where people from their own dough give more towards challah than a commercial bakery. Titnan we learned, shir challah echad me'esim varba. 1/24 of the dough is what you normally give for challah. If you're making dough for yourself or for giving a kiddush, you're making a chasna, then it's echad me'esim varba. But a nachton, if you're producing this bread to sell, so then echad me'arba'im u'shmoin. Then it would be 1 of 24, 1 of 48. So it's half the amount, only half the amount of what you separate for challah as an individual. You have to separate if you're making it commercially. So therefore, Dr. Gemara, when do we say that kedei chalasa is too much and it's considered chaser and therefore you can't use it for the erev? That's if you took off 1/24. But if you only took off 1/48 for challah, that would not be considered missing. Amar Chisna. Tafra b'kisem, what's the law? So you have a piece of a bilka and a piece broke off of it. So what do? You take the piece that broke off and you stick a toothpick into the bilka, and then you put the piece on it, and it looks like it's complete. And the one that bites into it, you give it out on Halloween. So the halach is Somebody's asking, wouldn't that cause Ava if you bite into a bilka and there's a toothpick inside it? So tofer b'kisam my Ravan liba. You are allowed to use it for an erev. It's considered complete. In fact, the Gemara about Tanya ain't my Ravan liba. I will learn to brush it if you can. So like Asha, how do you do a tifra? If you can tell that it was fused back together, he didn't do such a good job, then it wouldn't be acceptable. But if you couldn't tell, then it's not a problem. So all of these shilas about what's complete and what's not complete are also relevant for Lechem Mishnah on Shabbos. So what the Shlomo Zalman Auerbach paskins is that if you can't tell anything that's not obvious that you can't tell is considered good and it's good for Lechem Mishnah. And there's even a shaila of Lechem Mishnah. Let me just think what the shaila was. If it's something you don't eat. You're identifying a shaila for Lechem Mishnah, so you have 2 pieces of bread. You use 2 bilkas for Lechem Mishnah. Do both of them have to be edible or not? So it says, what if you are makbid only to eat canned matzahs on Pesach? Are you allowed to use as the second matzah, your Lechem Mishnah matzah? Are you allowed to use machine matzah? And the Shlomo Zalman says, yes, you are. Why can't you use a bilka from the freezer? You wonder what? Are you allowed to use a bilka from the freezer? Because it's frozen? I don't know. A lot of people use it. Bilka from the freezer. Did anyone ever use a bilka from the freezer for Lechem Mishnah? People do that
all the time.
Yeah, people do it all the time. Yeah, I guess if you wait long enough, it's edible. If you're in a fast food restaurant, no. But if you're at fine dining, you're waiting 40 minutes for your food, you'll be okay. Amar Shmuel. My Ravin, the pas oyers, you're allowed to use bread made out of rice, the pasdoichen and bread made out of millet. The article speaks out. These are breads that you don't make hamoitzi on, but they're still bread, so then you can use them. I'm going to tell you what Shmuel said. I heard it differently, and I heard the pasdoichen is my Eruvin, or pasdoichen ain't my Eruvin. You cannot use millet. And I believe that this is all totally on what was normal bread for people to eat. If it was normal to use pas iris, then it would be acceptable. And I guess it wasn't typical. It was unusual for people to use millet bread. That wasn't something that was normally used. My Rav Pasadoshim, you're allowed to use bread made out of lentils. And is that so? Well, there was a bread that was made out of lentils. The Havoi Bishani Demar Shmuel. They had this bread in the days of Shmuel. And you know what he did with this bread? The Shadia Lakalba, he threw to his dog, and even the dog wouldn't eat it. So if it's not royal achila, how could you suggest that you could make an Eruv with it? And there are those who learn in the early Achronim that this is the makar that chometz that's not royal achilas kela, you're not over your matzah, because it's not considered anything if even a dog won't eat it. So tomorrow, the type of bread that Shmuel, or that in Shmuel's times was served to a dog, and even the dog wouldn't eat it, that wasn't made out of strictly lentils. That was made out of a combination of many different grains. Because you find when the Rebbeinu Shalom was instructing Yecheskel Hanavi that there's going to be a hunger, the pasuk says, Hashem told Yecheskel, "Va'ata kach lecha chitin usa'ayin u'poil va'adoshim v'doichen v'kusmin." So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 different ingredients, 6 different grains. And the sata oisam v'chli echad, put them all into one keli. V'asisa oisam lecha lelechem mispar yomim asher teshoichev al titcha shlosh shmeis v'tishim yoyim. You're going to sit 309 techlenim. So it was basically warning the eating of an upcoming hunger. So you're going to eat this type of bread. And it says over there, Ugas Arim Taklena. One second. It says over here. Okay, let's see the Gemara up here.
I think we pay more for multi-grain now, don't we?
And nowadays things have changed quite a bit, because Subin is considered healthy today because it has bran mixed into it. But in those days, so the Gemara answers it was other meaning. Now, there's an important Rashi. That's what I was missing. Rashi speaks out.
They sell Cheskel's bread.
Minim harve hayu muravin ba tahi vadai lav pasi. That's not bread. The cheskel be Cheskel vada kachla chachitin, and it says in pasuk of Daled, which we don't have quoted in the Gemara, zlechem anoshim loy toiv amalav lechem. So Hashem was saying you're not going to be eating bread that normal people eat. So that's clearly indicating that this is not called normal bread, and it's mixed up with many different meanings. Your Papa Amar, that was even worse. It was even worse. If you look in the pasuk, it says, you should eat it like sarim, and the Gemara will explain what that means. But the next line is, he bigalale seyas ha'adam tugana, like name. You should bake the bread on a fire that's kindled with soyas adam. Hahid tzluya b'tsoyas adam havoy. So you can't riot that bread wasn't fit for human consumption because it was mixed of many meanings. It was because of the fuel that was used to bake it that made it that it wasn't royu lachilas adam. So now the Gemara wants to know, what does the pasuk mean? Sa'arim means barley, but we just learned a moment ago that this bread was not only made of barley, it was made out of many different meaning. So so the Gemara darshans it. So the darshan sa'arim means shiurim, meaning you should not eat large portions, you should eat in very small portions. So Rashi hay sa'arim lav dafke da shar meaning tu b'avabo l'shiurim techlena b'mishkal derech raivan v'loy l'soy. You should eat this in small amounts, like you eat during a hunger. You eat very little at a time to preserve your food. The shape of the bread, because they formed the dough into a shape, it was shaped like the bread that's made out of barley, which is lower lower quality. We like Eruvin Schitim. Shirash is Maguna, Loyafa. It's not a nice shape. Ketikan Eruvin Schitim, like when you shape the bread made out of wheat, Shemayafa Tikun Hauga Agula. No, you make it into a nice bilk. It's all nice. But I guess when they made barley bread, it was just like a clump of dough. It wasn't formed nicely. So Hashem was instructing Yecheskel that the bread that they should use should not be formed nicely. It should look ugly. So I'll call upon what we've learned from this sugya is that Rabbi Yeshua holds that it has to be complete. We don't necessarily hold like that, and if you could stitch it together, that'll be good. And if it's not visible, A, B, if it's only missing a small amount, it's not a problem. And then we also learned about different types of medium, bread made out of different types of medium, oyer, doichin, and adoshim. Is it adoshim? What was it? Adoshim. Adoshim, yeah. If we had a child, those breads are considered good. What's that? Yeah, to know if it's cut or not, you lift up the small piece, and if it's cut that much that the big piece falls down, that means it's not connected. If that's what shall be connected, but that probably means because it's big enough of a piece that if that piece was disconnected, it would be considered chosr. If there's only a very small piece missing, then it's good for lechem mishnah. You need to know these halachas during the week, during the year. It's not just a big deal. But when you're holding on the second to the last day of Pesach, and your matzahs are dwindling, you have to start. I don't know who amongst us didn't push the envelope a little bit in deciding what's kiddush sholem when you're analyzing a matzah on the last day of Pesach, and you don't have a lot of options available. I remember when I lived in 120 Shelbourne. That's right. I remember when I lived in 120 Shelbourne, I was talking to my friends about that I happened to have had some extra matzahs in my house because I had overbought. And I come home from shul that night. It was like also at the end of Pesach. And my wife tells me so-and-so knocked on our door. This so-and-so was a multi-millionaire. He knocks on our door and he tells my wife, your husband told me to tell you to give me a box of matzahs. It was completely ladam, but he probably needed for lechem mishnah. It was at the end, I didn't say anything. It was very funny. He happened to have known that I had extra box of matzahs because I was speaking. He overheard a conversation. Zakta Hela Gemara. Zakta Hela Gemara. Noitin Adam Ma Lechamvani Ulanachtaim Kadesh Yiskaloi Erev. So a person wants to join in the Erev of his community. So he goes over to a chenvani or he goes over to a baker and he tells him, here's some money and I want you to be kind for me some bread that you're going to contribute as part of the Erev. Kadesh Kisla Erev. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, he holds that works. Loi zachu loi ma'isav. Loi zachu loi ma'isav. It will not work. It will not work. Rashi explains why. Rashi says, we know, I was just discussing this with Chaim Tzvi a couple of days ago, that we know that midaraisa kesef is kaina. So what is kinin kesef? If I want to buy some bread from you, I give you kesef, and when you take my kesef, automatically I'm kaina the product. So midaraisa that works. Midarabanan, they said kinin kesef doesn't work, and the reason why midarabanan said it doesn't work, we're going to see on Amud Beis, is imagine if I go to a vendor and I give him $100 to buy bread, and then a fire breaks out by the vendor, and the bread that I bought burnt, got destroyed. So the vendor will say, "I feel terrible. Your bread got burnt," and that's going to cause problems. So by saying it's not kinda, it's going to force the vendor to work very hard to salvage and save that bread, because if not, then he's not going to get paid. And there's a very famous story. Right, but no, by saying kesef is not koina, if you say kesef is not koina, then he's going to make sure to save the bread. Right, I hear. Oh, that's why there's no gzeira there. I hear. That's right. Okay. Okay, very good. There's a famous story with a fellow who bought a horse. I think he bought a horse like on a website, sight unseen. He spent a lot of money for this horse, and he won the eBay bet, the eBay auction. And when he goes to pick up, and of course you have to pay right away, right? They bill you right away. When he goes to pick up his horse, it was a thoroughbred, it was a kosher horse. The owner takes him into the stable to show him the horse that he's going to come pick up, and the horse is dead. So the seller says, "Oh, babe, your horse died." So the guy says, "My horse died. Your horse died." They got into a big fight. He says, "Listen, I'm not fighting with you. If you don't take your dead horse out of my stable, I'm going to charge you rent as well." So he said, "Okay, I'm going to fix this guy. I'm going to teach him a lesson." So he also went on eBay and he sold 1,000 tickets for $50 each for this horse. And one guy won. When the guy won, he comes and takes him and says, "Oi, your horse died. Here's $50. I'll refund your money for your ticket." That's how he recouped his money. Anyways, okay, let's get more about it. Because you were not kohen. So there's an interesting machlokes here between Rashi and Tosfos. So Rashi says the reason why it doesn't work is he says as follows: what if this company for free was mezaka some bread to the whole city? He was the guy who was doing it. Nevertheless, this guy won't be included, even though this company is going to make an error for everybody for free. Since you contributed, now it messes you up. So even if the company was mezaka l'chol acher, still in the error. This individual who gave money, the company did not have in mind when he's being mezaka to everybody else for free to be mezaka to him, because this individual said, "I want to pay for it." He only had kavanah to give this person his chalik in the Eruv because he sold it to him. But the kidding didn't work. Even the moist in the kindness. There's some chadai they had. Come to choice that it's going to be shalom midaito. It's Yana's money, and therefore it will not work. That's what Rashi says. But Tosfos says something interesting. Tosfos says, "Pirsha kodesh, I feel even though this company was for free, being mezaka to everybody, the company for this individual who gave him money didn't have kavanah to be mezaka him for free. Rather, his kavanah was that it was going to be paid for. Kishar mezakim be'erev, elikles hamo var in knilo. Zok Tosfos bechinam pirshkein. Rashi didn't need to say that. Even if this company says, "I don't care if he paid," as a backstop, I'm going to also be mezaket him for free. Even if he did that, even if I asked someone else to please be koina a piece of this Eruv on behalf of that fellow, and I want to give it to him for free, still ain't an Eruv. You know why? Since the person who made this contribution wanted Bedavka to be koina from the company, but it doesn't work because Kasab is not koina. And when this company is trying to be mizaket, he's doing it with express not having permission to the balabais, because the balabais asked it to be done in a certain way. And you can't make an error unless the person knows about it, and therefore it would not work even if the company wanted to be mizaka. Even if the company says, "You know what? Okay, the money doesn't work, but I want to be mizaka mechelik for free." Even that doesn't work because an erev only works midaitoi, and we're soon going to see that this only applies to erev etchubin, because we learned that erev chatzeris it's ben midaitoi ben shalom midaitoi. We learned a couple of days ago, because everybody has to be part of the erev, which you're going to mess everybody up. But erev etchubin could only be midaitoi because you might make an error for me on this side, but I might want to go to the other side. So because of that, by erev etchubin, it always has to be midaitoi. Well, right now we're learning that it's erev chatzeris. Right now in the Gemara, right now in the Mishnah, in the Havin, we're learning that it's an erev chatzeris. So a guy in the chutzner went to the baker and says, "Here's $1, and I want to buy from you some bread. So whichever bread you're going to contribute to the erev, I want to buy a piece of that bread. So now I have a chelik." So since money doesn't affect the kinyan, and I've already said this is the way I want it to go down. That's right. So now I wasn't conscious, so my attempt didn't work. And the other way of having the Erev is by merely the Chenveni being makna to me, like he's makna to everybody else who didn't contribute. That doesn't work because that's slow midai. So he actually messed it up for himself. However, umoidim, they're moida that if you didn't go over to a Chenveni or a nachtoim, rather you just went over to your friend and gave him money and told him to buy for you bread, there it works. And Rashi tells us why. Because if you go over to a nachtoim and say you want to buy bread, it means you want to buy bread. But if you go over to me and say you want to buy bread, I'm not a baker. I don't sell bread. So obviously, the purpose of why you're giving me the money is to be zoichen and erev, to make me a shliach, to be zoichen and erev for you, not because you actually want me to buy bread. Okay, and the underlying reason is my Rabban Adam Elamidait. You're not allowed to. You cannot make an error for someone unless it's midas. So Rashi speaks of something very important. If he said the word zechili, his intention was to be koina. My intention in giving the money to the chenveni or to the nachtoim is to sell me some bread, not to appoint the chenveni or the nachtoim as a shliach to contribute to an error on my behalf. What if I went to a baker and I gave him money and then I took the kikar in my hand? So I was physically cutting the kikar and then I gave it back to the chenveni. There for sure it will work because there clearly I'm making the chenveni a shliach to contribute into an error. And who then if it was a different person? When do we say this whole halacha that has to be midaitai is be'er v'tchumen? It's only be'er v'tchumen. But be'er v'chatzeros, my Rav l'daitai v'shaloi l'daitai v'shazachan l'adam shaloi b'fana v'inchavan l'adam elo b'fana v'inchavan l'adam shaloi b'fana. By erev v'chatzeros, it's a schos. It's only a schos because by me being kind in the air for you, you're acquiring bread that you would otherwise have not had, and you're allowed to carry. So it's only good. So I could do it for you even without you instructing me to do so. But erev v'tchumen, wherever I'm going to be kind shvisa for you, you're losing access to a different place. If I make your Erev to the east, you lose access to the west, and vice versa. So therefore, that's considered a chayv, and that's where we say it has to be midaita. So on Amar Aleph, where you had the shiloh, the midaita, it's only referring to Erev Tchumen of Yehuda, not Erev Chatzeros. Because there, even if you didn't make me into a shliach, I could be your shliach. Zok Eile Gemara, my Talmud Rabbi Eliezer. What's the story of Rabbi Eliezer Tamakama who holds that the Erev does work? Holei Moshe. At the end of the day, there was no Mashiach Adam, and Kesef is not koine. So how in the world is the Rabbi Eliezer, the Tamakam of our Mishnah, why does it work according to him if I gave it Nachman? Also, Rabbi Eliezer Kedalit Prokim B'Shana. Rabbi Eliezer made this attempt to make an Erev like Dal Prokim B'Shana, where we're going to still see there was an exemption made to the rule that Kesef is not koine. Normally, Kesef is not koine, but there are certain times where even Kesef would be koine. What happens if it was a known thing that if you flew American Airlines from Toronto to New York and you had a book, I'm talking about before Corona, and you had a confirmed reservation of flying from Toronto to New York or vice versa, you knew that you had at least a 50% chance of actually taking off because half the flights were always canceled. Remember that? Why were they canceled? So they make a whole bunch of different bubble why they were canceled. The reason why they were canceled is because they didn't fill. If they didn't fill, American Airlines didn't want to spend the money. And then Shmuel said that, and if you use points to book their seats, then even if you got on the plane, you only had a 50% chance of getting a seat. Very good. So I'll call upon them. You see that when there's low demand, the vendor sometimes will cancel the order. So people in those days weren't able to buy a whole animal. They would go to a butcher and they'd say, "Oh, I like this cow. Here's $10. I'm buying $10 worth of meat from this cow. So when you shecht it, I'm going to get $10 worth of meat." And the vendor would take a whole bunch of purchases and then would check the animal and would distribute it to all the different people who bought it. So what happens if I put $10 on a cow that's worth $1,000 and nobody else did? Can I force the vendor to shech the cow and give it to me? So normally you can. But for Dalit Prokim, there's 4 times in the year. You force the butcher to shech the animal. Afilu shur shava elef dinner, even if the shur is worth 1,000 dinner. The ein lelakech el dinner echad, and the only amount of meat sold on this whole cow was only 1 dinner. Koifin oisay lishli. You force the vendor to shech. And Rashi tells us why were these times unique? It was Erev Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, where people need food. Erev Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, Erev Shavuos, Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Tov Achon Shel Chag, and Erev Yom Kippur Begalil. So there were 4 times where a lot of people were buying meat. You needed it for Yom Tov. So those days, the vendor was forced to sell. Therefore, there's a downside to it as well. In Meis Lekeach. If the animal dies before it checked it, it's the Lekeach's animal. So the butcher can legitimately tell the buyer, unfortunately, the animal that you bought $10 worth of meat in is dead. You lost your investment. That's right. But he also lost. Frank the Gemara, there was no Mashiach. So how could you say that Lekeach was koine if he merely paid? He never took possession of the meat. He never made a Mashiach. So why is it Meis Lekeach? So maybe it's speaking when he actually made a Mashiach. If you're telling me that this price is talking about where there was actually a valid kinyan done, let's analyze the rest of this price. The rest of the year, it's not that way. If I bought $10 on $1,000 ox, where the owner is not compelled to shecht it, if the animal dies, I get my money back because it's not a kinyan. If you're doing this is a case where I actually made a Mashiach, so there also I was kind of we're speaking without Mashiach. But if you had somebody else be kind it for me, so the vendor said, Yankel, be kind $10 of this meat, make Mashiach on this cow, be kind $10 of this meat from the cow for Beryl, who wants to buy that. So Bedalat Prokim Elu, this Chosuloi, during those 4 times of the year, where it's a benefit to the buyer because he needs the meat, because it's before Yom Tov and everyone's buying meat, then Zachan Lo Shalai B'Famid. But the rest of the year, Rashi says something interesting. Buying meat is a chayv. You know why buying meat is a chayv? It's like Rashi, La Hoitzi Mois, the Litness Basar. I'm sorry, that's Chuzulai. Chayv Lo Shemoitzi Mois. It's any time you force somebody to spend money, that's chayv Lo. On Yom Tov, it's special. On Yom Tov, it's special to buy food for Yom Tov. There, it's a Chuzulai. But all the rest of the year, it's a chayv for someone to spend money, even if he's making a purchase that he wants. And therefore, ein chavan loy ella b'van. I hear. Ravila Amar B'Yechanan. V'dalet prakim elu. Okay, so again, so it's made like these dalet prakim, and therefore, the reason why, even though a kinyan Mashiach was not made, even though there was no Mashiach made in our Mishnah, and you just gave money, we consider it like the dalet prakim. We consider making an erev for Shabbos like those dalet prakim, and the Rabbanan are going to say that kesef would be a kinyan, even though normally it's not a kinyan. That's the first one. Rav Ilam Abrechanan, the dalet prakim elu hamidu chachamim divrein al divrei Torah. These 4 times of the year, the way the lekech was koined is not because some third party was zoicha in it for him. Rather, those 4 times of the year, the Rabbanan suspended their rule that kesef is not koined, and therefore kesef works. Why did the Rabbanan say you have to Mashiach? Is gzera shemiyarmu ulai nisra chitcha ba'aliyah. So it's only a gzera de Rabbanan why we don't allow kesef to be koined. Therefore, in this case, before Yom Tov, we say kesef is koine, and that's why the lekeach was koine his $10 of meat. And then in our mission as well, we belt it for Shabbos to make an error for Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer holds that their kinyan kesef will be koine, and the money that you give the vendor actually purchases you a piece of bread, and therefore your error is going to be a good error. So the mission tells us that by other people other than a Nachtem or a Cheveni, who they normally don't sell bread, we assume that it's a shlichus. Man sharkalot. Who's everybody else? Amarav balabayis. It means a balabayis, and Rashi said earlier in the Mishnah, it's that a balabayis, a normal person, is not selling bread. And therefore, when the person gave him money, he was clearly having him just become a shliach for him to make an erev. He wasn't using that money to actually purchase the bread from him. Dr. Gemara, Amar Shmuel lo shanu el nachtem balabayis koine. Amar Shmuel lo shanu el mo avol kli koine. So this goes back to what Chaim Tzvi said. This is when do you say that it wouldn't work? That's if you gave money to the nachtem, because that's where there's a gzeira that the kinyi kesef doesn't work. But if you gave him a kli and you did kinyi chalipin, then avada would be koine, because kinyi chalipin is koine. And Chaim Tzvi said why is because you're still holding on to the money. As long as you're holding on to the money, you know that the vendor is going to be careful to protect whatever it is that you bought from him. The words, if you're going to a nachtay or a chemini, and you tell him, with this money, zecheli, give to me, sell to me some bread, that's when you say, kinyi kesef was not koina, and therefore he messes up his erev. Of Omar Aravli, if the words that he used when he gave the money to the nachtem was the words Aravli, make for me an erev, then clearly his words showed that shliach shavye. He wasn't trying to purchase bread with that money. He was just giving the chenveni, the nachtem money, to be his shliach to contribute to the erev for him, and therefore Bakani it would work. I'm sorry? Even for Tchumen, that's correct, because I said Aravli. So I'm not looking to buy. The whole purpose, my transaction was not a purchase. My transaction was making a shliach. So if I said Aravli for a nachtem, it's as if I said zecheli to a regular person. Because if you say zecheli to a regular person, automatically it means I'm making you a shliach. Because I can't be buying bread from a regular person, because a regular person is not in the business of selling bread. For every tchumen, you don't need someone who's a bardas. It's just to deliver it. You can't trust him that he placed it, but you could send him to physically deliver it to the place. You still need a bardas to place it. By every tchumen, you could send it even with an animal. As long as there's someone there receiving that you could rely on, will place it for you. But there's not a kinyan there. Every tchumen is not a kinyan-based thing. Correct. Amar Buda, Amad of Amar Amar Buda, Amar Shmuel. Very interesting Allah. Amar Buda, Amar Shmuel. Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. The halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, who said that by Eruvin Chatzeros you could be Zaychel Adam Shaloi B'Fanav because it's for sure a schos. It's only by Erev Tchumen where it's not a schos. V'loyot elakol makim sheshana Rabbi Yehuda ba'Eruvin halacha k'moisei. Anytime Rabbi Yehuda says something in a mission in Eruvin, we paskin like him. Amalei Rav Chana Bar Gisal, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, afilu b'mavui shenitlu karaysav oilacheya. There's a machlokes if on Shabbos the lechi went missing or the kayr went missing. Rabbi Yehuda holds that you still can carry there until the end of Shabbos, and you only have to fix it before next Shabbos. While there were those who argued on them and said that you have to stop carrying immediately on Shabbos. So are you saying that we're practicing like Rabbi Yehuda in that case as well? Amalei no. The Eruvin amartilach v'loy b'mechitzos. Only when it comes to Hilchos Eruvin, when we're making our chayers or plumen, but the mechitzos that have to be built, that we don't necessarily pass from like Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei Rabbi Rava Rav Ashi halacha from the fact that Shmuel said that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda mechlal the pligi. That would indicate that there's actually somebody that argues on Rabbi Yehuda. Is that true? And in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said Bamed Devar Mamurim. She said Bamed. Anytime he uses the word of Amos or Bamed, he's not arguing on the Tanakama. He's merely explaining the Tanakama. So you, Shmuel, seem to say that there's a dispute over here, but in fact there is no dispute because the word Bamed means that he's just explaining the words of the Chachamim. Gemara, are you saying that when it says Amos and Bameh, it's not a machlokes? And we learned a couple of days ago that if after you made an erev in a neighborhood, more people moved into the neighborhood, Allah is moisev u'mezaket. You have to add to the erev on behalf of those people who join. But v'tzorach l'idea, if you're taking from other people's food to contribute to the Erev, they have to know about it. So you clearly see that even by Erev Chatzeros, it's Tarech idea. You cannot be Zoicha Shaloi Midaitom. You have to let them know about it. And you're saying over here that nobody argues. There where you need to let the person know when you're taking from him to contribute to the Erev Chatzeros, that's because there's a chotzer that on either side of it has a mavui, and he might not even be using that mavui. He might be using the other mavui, and therefore, when you're taking from him for an Erev Chatzeros, he has to be masking because he not necessarily wants to be part of the mavui that you're going to make an error for him on. The Gemara, we learned the Gemara discussing this very issue that said that that's not pshat of the Mishnah. Rather Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on the Chachamim. Ella Gavra Karamus. You're asking a steerer on two different people, because Shmuel is the one who said that someone's arguing Rabbi Yehuda, and who did we quote from? Who said that Rabbi Yehuda is only saying a pirish? It was Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So who said Shmuel agrees to Rabbi Shua ben Levi? Rabbi Shua ben Levi might say that nobody argues with Rabbi Yehuda, but Shmuel might hold that when Rabbi Yehuda says something in the Mishnah, people do argue on him, and nevertheless he passes like him. So Gavra Karamish, you're asking me a question from Rabbi Shua ben Levi and Shmuel. Mar Sover Pligi. Shmuel holds that the other Tanaim could argue with Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah and the Eruvin, but we pass him like Rabbi Yehuda anyway. And it's possible that Rabbi Shua ben Levi holds that there's no machlokes at all. I guess we'll stop here.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.